Hello, I'm Indrajit Gupta. I'm a co-founder at Founding Fuel. A very warm welcome to all of you to this special Facebook Live and Periscope event in association with Boom Live. Our special guest today is Haresh Chawla. Welcome, Haresh, to this show. All of you would have read his insightful commentary in Founding Fuel on India's tech sector, tech startup sector, and his analysis of the digital economy. Last week, he wrote possibly one of his most influential essays on how India's digital economy could rediscover its mojo, and it generated a huge response. It is clear that we're at an important moment in our digital economy where the old rules need to give way to new ones, and therefore we've invited Haresh to interact with the Founding Fuel community, to share his insights on how entrepreneurs need to think about the future, and take some of your questions as well. You could either tweet your questions with the hashtag AskHaresh, or if you're watching this live on Facebook, you could leave the questions in our comment section on our Founding Fuel Facebook page. So without much ado, let's jump into the discussion. Haresh, if you were to look at the last 5 years, a lot of money has been raised to fund startups, yet the failure rate, one would argue, has been extraordinarily high. To your mind, what went wrong and why did so many startups really fail?
So actually startups will fail. Actually the way to reframe the issue is whether well-funded startups are failing. So because startups fail for a variety of reasons. They don't get the right idea, the founders can't execute. But I think the challenge here is that even startups that got well funded, they've started failing. And I think there are several reasons for this. One is, I think people didn't realize the unit economic challenge in India. That if you just clone a Western startup and the kind of margin that a gross margin that a transaction leaves on the table is very low, and if it can't afford the kind of overheads one builds. The second thing is, I think founders also some of them lost their way in the kind of burns. I'm not against burn. Burn is a great thing because you're building a business. But where is the burn going? If the burn is largely going in building overheads and going to fund, let's say, Google and Facebook and really do lazy marketing, that burn just evaporates and doesn't leave any loyalty behind. So I think a lot of our startups discovered that you can buy transactions, but the money just evaporates and the customer comes back in the same shape and form. You have to remarket to him all over again and get the discount going again. And that's why the money is just kind of evaporated. And I think the third thing also is that the complexity of the market is just humongous. We are not a unidimensional market like several others are in the West. It's heterogeneous, as we talked about in my piece as well, that there are very different kind of people. Therefore, the kind of calculations people made on addressable market have been flawed. So I think that's the third reason they thought the market is huge. Let's pump in money, let's build the transactions, and then we will think about profitability. I think that whole formula has failed, that you can just burn your way through to success here. Network effects are very difficult to find. Competition is quite a bit in the market. And the final point is that, when founders walk into a startup or start doing their business, I think one challenge I see is when I do discussions with them is they focus on the transaction too much. What problem I'm solving? Not really thinking, why will somebody use me to solve the problem? So they're not focusing at all on the behavioral side of the issue, which is what you end up thinking about when you think about the consumers. You think about the market there and not only about the transaction. Because the transaction slowly, sooner or later, will get commoditized, as we saw. I mean, yes, some of the e-commerce guys came and set up the first COD, they set up the first logistics infrastructure. But somebody entering today, getting a TV to come from Delhi to Bombay to my house is not a big challenge anymore. So therefore, I think the whole issue was pre-transaction, what's the behavioral elements that you need to lock in, the hooks you need to create, and post-transaction, are you able to use the customer that you've built and bring him back at a much lower price, or you again back in the market spending all over again. So I think these are the few things that it's just a question of not of the market, but the behavior of the participants who got funded. In fact, one of the ironies is that today you're seeing a lot of innovation. In the last few weeks, you've heard every kind of company announce a whole new bunch of innovations. But frankly, you look at it, all the innovation is coming up only when they see the end of the runway. Right. All of this could have been done 2 years ago. Today, yes, they're saying, okay, we'll go language, we will add video, we'll add buying guides, we will make lighter apps, or we'll make lighter mobile pages. Where was all this 2 years ago? I mean, all the
So
money
why
got
do-
spent on the same market, doing the same things, because they were all chasing transaction metrics.
Right. One of the other important points, and I'll just build on one of the aspects that you spoke about, which is the total addressable market.
Yeah.
And you made the point that startups have perhaps addressed a very small slice at the top end of the pyramid, and too many of them have chased the same opportunity.
Yeah.
And you made the case that perhaps there's a need to look beyond that India one, as you call it. Is there a danger that you might fall between the stools and try and in the effort to try and be everything to everyone, you could also create a creature
No,
that
so India 1, India
isn't
2 are
focused.
not separate markets.
Okay.
It's one India. It's the issue here is that they have spent repeatedly on getting the India 1 customer. So I think all the effort that has gone in the last 2 years, if you keep, you bombard 50 full page ads in the same city of Mumbai with your new, billion day offer or a zillion day offer or whatever offer, the fact is that you're not getting an incremental set of customers. It's the same set of people, and now it's been proven, and I said this about 1.5 years ago, that there are only about 35-40 million internet buyers who can afford, and that's remained the same. So could that money have been spent differently was my question actually, and therefore is this India 1, India 2, India 3 a way to think about the market, that maybe India 1, the moment I reach them, they're very easy to reach, they're available on Google and Facebook, they have the money, so you reach them, and then your focus is there to build loyalty with them. India 2 is where you need to go create trial. They need to be the first adopters. So there you need to go in the language, create video guides, create other mechanisms to reach them, make it easy for them to buy. Why is the EMI solution coming so many years later? I mean, the whole India 1, India 2 market was open for EMI based solutions from e-commerce players. So actually it's not as if those markets are completely separate.
Yeah.
It's just a question of what's your target audience and how you optimize your startup and its spend for that market. So it's a question of optimization, and there's been no optimization. There's been almost like maximization. How much money can I spend? How many transactions can I generate from this India 1 market? And therefore you throw discounts. If I give you a 100 rupee note for 80 rupees, what will you do? You'll take it away, take it up, right?
Right. I think you're making an interesting point, and I kind of want to understand this a little better, because you're saying that India 1, 2 and 3 are not necessarily independent markets. They're almost porous, because the young consumer, if you look at it in the maybe 5-10 years ago, wouldn't necessarily in India 3 would not necessarily aim to be and behave and spend like India 1 consumer, but that's happening. Young consumers are spending well beyond their means in some ways, which is not necessarily a good sign, but how much of that dynamic really starts to impact the way that you look at opportunities?
See, my sense is, I think that's where the big opportunity is, that aspiration is now democratic. It's no longer limited to the pockets in the big cities. It's there in the villages as well. They can be given access to the same kind of services, the same kind of education, the same kind of product and other knowledge-based, and information-based systems that you can give them. So, in a sense, I think that's the big opportunity to really create one big market, at least in a few segments.
Right.
So it's not necessary that a kid who's getting his education through his mobile or classroom through his mobile in Bombay, he'll probably get the same, another kid can get it in Raipur. So actually aspiration is now we're more and more moving towards a single market in certain categories, which are, let's say, not just product led. It's not just selling more clothes, because the kid in Raipur probably cannot afford as many denim jeans as the kid in Bombay. But doesn't mean that he can't aspire to have the same level of education, or he can't aspire to learn the same level of English from his smartphone.
That's right.
Yeah.
So if one were to kind of define this sweet spot, and there's a question from Girendra Kasmalkar, who's an entrepreneur from Pune, and he asks, with the focus on India 1 and 2, what are the best locations for digital India? Is it small town startups? I mean, university towns, are those the ones where there would be the market is likely to be more attractive? Do you have a fix based on the businesses that you work with?
I think it will come down to the specific context. My sense is that you have so much friction in India 2 and India 3, where those people need to find jobs, they need to be reskilled, they need to learn language, they need to learn new vocations. That plus, for example, the kind of intermediation that happens, which is actually biased against them. Again, there are huge opportunities for startups to come in there and really try and bridge these divides actually. So technology should be used to actually bridge this divide, and that bridging will create value for the startup. I mean, whoever looks at that opportunity.
Right.
So it's a, my sense is a lot of focus has gone into what's happened in the West. West doesn't have the same challenges we do.
Yeah.
Of course, they've got great valuations, but clearly, as we've seen, that's not worked here. Absolutely. And in the West as well, if you look at the startups that are collapsing there, which are just built on saying, okay, we will deploy hyper local delivery, or we'll do hyper local. I've seen the laundry startup just evaporate in the West. Clearly, what is the big value we're adding to technology? If you look at somebody trying to do a laundry startup, what is the value that really technology is adding to the whole process? And that's the question you need to stare hard at before you launch something like this.
Right. Rajesh, I just wanted to move to a slightly different theme, and this is around talent and startups and how that they intersect.
Yeah.
There are many people out there who've been kind of bitten by the entrepreneurship bug, who are looking to work for a startup in some ways. Any thoughts in terms of how they ought to, in this environment, think about making that transition from a stable corporate job to work at a startup?
Okay, so I guess the last 2-3 years startup jobs have been sexy, and they've been sexy because A, it's new, challenging, you get a lot of opportunity for growth, but they also were paying well. They were not paying you subsistence level salaries. My sense is that you'll now find true startup employment happening where you will have to actually give up something. You'll have to give up a part of your pay packet or what you regularly earn to join a startup. I think the moment that mind is clear to you, and that's the approach with which you're going, that I'm joining this business or this startup, it's likely to fail, but I'm going to walk in here knowing fully well that I am taking a leap with my own career, and I want to do this. I think that the whole expectation mismatch that got built up is going away. So my sense is it's very healthy. People who will enter startups will think about it a bit more. Unfortunately, there are people who are working in startups who've lost their jobs. For them, I know it's a tough thing for people to take a salary cut, but that's what's going to happen to a lot of them.
So but you see that playing out?
I see that playing out.
Reset in salaries?
I see that reset in salaries, and my message to all these people, it's fine. The fact is that the market has turned. At your young age, you actually should be paying to learn. So I would rather, it will be much easier now not to shift job just for the price or the pay that you get, but actually look at what you can learn in that startup. Or
because
learn
founders were always a little fearful that, look, if we don't pay market salaries in some cases, that we won't be able to attract the best talent. And why would they move from a good high-paying corporate job? That happened because
of a ridiculous amount of burn over the last 2 years. I mean, it just happened because there was too much money sloshing around. It put salaries of every kind of startup employee up. Talent was scarce, and therefore the costs went up. My sense is this rationalization is good. More importantly is the rationalization in the mindset that it's not some great sexy business to go in and everything will be hunky-dory. These are going to be hard-working businesses that will take much longer than people anticipated for them to convert the ESOPs into millions of dollars.
Sure. Last year, Harish, you had kind of done this conversation with us on the first Google Hangout that we had done on building on enterprises that last. And you had spoken about the need for founders to bring in professionals that with the experience of scaling enterprises. Now this has been a relationship that has often been fraught with some amount of tension and conflict, if you like. And so what have the last 5 years, to my mind, taught us about that relationship between founders and professionals? What works, what doesn't work? What do founders need to do to transition?
So my sense is that any generalization of this is hazardous.
Yeah.
But if you look at the context, the kind of energy, passion that an entrepreneur or a startup founder brings has to be complemented by people who know how it's done. That mix is needed by a company, and especially so in India because the complexity of a business rises with scale. See, unlike most other markets, the moment getting the first 100 customers, the first 1,000 customers is easier here. But as soon as you start scaling, the kind of work ethic we deal with within our organizations, and running an Indian organization is the most challenging, and I'm sure people will agree, compared to any other part of the world. So there's a work ethic challenge within our firms, and there is a market complexity. So as you scale, it's not as if your model becomes easier, it becomes more and more tougher. And therefore, if you can get people who have done this before and who know how to handle constraints better, actually. Somehow Indian professionals have live in many more constraints, internal, external, all kinds of things that go on in Indian organizations. So I think that balance is important. And if you see the large global companies, most of them have had a professional join in at a very senior level and help the founder navigate, because the founder brings a different charisma and a character to the business than a professional can. And why would anybody want to do all of this together at one time? You're not, a founder should accept these are things I'm good at, and these are the things I'm not good at. And you're seeing that today. Investors are forcing this change if the founders haven't done it themselves. So that's playing out clearly in several places and will play out even more. It's better for a founder to actually turn around and say, these are the things I can do well. Let me now find the best people who've done it before. And that doesn't mean you just import people from Silicon Valley. It implies that you find people who've done this before in Indian traditional companies.
And that calls for a certain degree of maturity and self-awareness from a founder as well. It's a hard thing because of that whole founder's dilemma.
It's my sense is, and also survival instinct, because fact is that founders need to realize that putting in more inexperienced people as your complexity rises is a recipe for disaster. And again, I'm saying these words, you'll probably hear them come out in a few weeks and few months as people talk about their experiences in the startups which are challenged.
Right. Now I'll move the conversation to something that you certainly have a point of view, again, having been an investor, and you've kind of, you're obviously looking at new business plans as they come in at this point in time. So what are those business kinds of plans that seem to kind of get your interest? What do you look for when you're looking at evaluating a team that comes in looking for backing in some ways? And is this really a good time to invest? I mean, as an investor, what's your sense?
No, I think it's a great time to invest actually today, because I think a lot of fluff around the market, and that was there, it's wool in the heads of the founders, wool in the head of all of us investors, angels, VCs, has gone away. I think we are taking real hard looks at the business plans. I have made my share of mistakes as well. And I think very clearly you need to club startups into a few buckets. There is a bucket where, is a startup coming in the way of where a consumer is already spending money, or is the startup going to change a habit, or is somewhere in between? So I think based on the economics of that model is how you really have to evaluate. So it's difficult to make it specific unless you put a team plus the business model in front. But my sense is that I think the lessons have been learned hard, that if your business is throwing up only 200 or 300 rupees of margin per transaction, and you're going to deploy people to make sure the transaction is consummated, it's going to be extremely expensive to scale up. Right. So the burn will probably not pay off.
Right. So I can see a lot of questions popping up on Twitter. So we'll see if we can take a few of those. And I think P. Pahadi, that's his Twitter handle, says, do startups really need top talent? Aren't startups working with all kinds of constraints to achieve the unachievable? Your point on quality of talent that you need, what sort of mindset do you need for?
I guess the first thing you need is grit. I think that's it. I think too much of it has been romanticized by our media over the last few years. All that is going to go away, and I think it's going to be the first thing you need in a startup founder is grit and the ability to take the pain over a longer period of time. This is not to say that startups shouldn't raise money. They shouldn't raise as much as they can, depending on again the context. But the fact is how you spend that money, how you recruit a team. As I said, it's not a revenue is going to be a challenge in this market. It's tough to make money, and therefore your ingenuity comes down as to how, at what cost can you deliver the service, and at that cost, is it a sustainable business? Or at that cost, even if you're losing money today, are there some characteristics of the pre and post transaction which I talked about, of consumer behavior, that can pay you off? I mean, in a sense, are you getting a great repeat rate? Are you getting great delight that customers, you don't have to keep on going back to advertising or marketing to get a new set of customers in? So unless that's clear, I would say that this top talent is a difficult place to be. I don't think they can afford. The ideal team is a great bunch of talented people who then lead a bunch of average people at average costs and deliver a great experience.
So Anugraha Abraham, I think, has asked a question, in a country divided along caste, religious and communal lines, what are the hooks that the revolution might offer for social inclusion? That's a tough one.
Tough one. See, if you look at, I think if startups or all the things that young people are doing today, if they can educate people a bit more, if they can bring literacy to these markets, if they can help these people grow out of, I think a lot of these issues that he's talked about are a function of how poor we are.
Right.
The wedges that are created is a function of how much time people have when they are not doing productive things.
Sure.
So if our businesses can generate employment, can reskill our people, can educate them, then you'll probably have these divides go away, because the more aware a person is, you probably have these issues become a little less.
So Ayush Pranav on Twitter asks, what's the reason for a lot of Me Too startups in the Indian startup ecosystem? And you've kind of talked about this ad nauseum, but you might want to take a stab at another stab.
No, my sense is that it's a function of how things played out in the West. You had a situation where the VCs are actually betting on horses, really. It's the same race, and they don't know which guy in that segment is going to make it ahead, and they are willing to actually pump in a lot of money, even if the horse is probably dead by the end of the race, to win the race. The environment is a bit different in India. The market is not settled. The market is still growing. The market is still changing. So therefore, this race is not ending anytime soon. So therefore, here my sense is, of course, we funded several Me Too startups, but the startups that are actually have been able to get their business model right, have been able to work at a lower cost structure, have been focused on managing their overheads, are probably, it's like a marathon versus a sprint. So, you're going to run multiple kilometers and the terrain is changing. The moment you cross over from India 1 to India 2, the terrain completely changes. So that's the difference. These are large homogeneous markets in the West, where arriving at this last man standing or winner takes all is a much more real phenomena. Whereas in India, the race is many more laps to go. So that's the difference.
Right. We have a question from Rajeshri Naik as well. She's a co-founder at Ping, our partners here on this show, and she wants to know that now that the e-com projects, in some ways, the prospects of e-com have been recalibrated, in your opinion, which sector is worth betting on for investors?
A difficult one to answer, because my sense is that the whole market is wide open still, in everything, in food tech, in ed tech, even in e-commerce. I know we've got the horizontal e-commerce market locked up between 3 or 4 players, and we'll see how that plays out. Vertical e-commerce is lying open. I think India doesn't have sufficient brands actually for the heterogeneity of its audiences. There are businesses that can be built which are direct to commerce, that can reach out to the market. So again, in every segment, there is a set of consumers that are looking for solutions. So therefore, without going into specifics, clearly it depends on the exact opportunity, and again the bunch of founders who are really attacking it and how they are attacking it.
There's also a conversation going on around B2B versus B2C, and I'm kind of fielding a question from Rajan Srinivasan from Mumbai, who asked on Twitter. There's so much being said about B2C businesses, but what are your views on B2B and their dynamics, and what pointers do you have for entrepreneurs?
I think B2B businesses are huge opportunities, but they will not give you multi-million-dollar outcomes.
Okay.
But that's no reason to be disappointed. So you will have multi-million-dollar outcome probably, but every segment of the B2B market has an opportunity for disintermediation. In fact, if we look at it, many medium-sized companies don't even know what to do with technology within their own firms. So if somebody launches a CIO on call, for example, or sets up a relationship with a data center and implements technology for these companies, that's a big opportunity. Even in their supply and logistics chains, as you're seeing today, our trucking businesses, logistics businesses help them actually audit consumers or do research. All of these opportunities are available. So my sense is B2B is under the radar. Frankly, that's good. And of course, if you're very clear that you're okay with being in a business that's probably a few hundred crores, not a few $100 million, B2B is a great place to be.
Right. I'll have another question on the similar lines from Suprita Sarkar, and she asks on Twitter, will the digital economy in India see more direct-to-consumer models rather than traditional distributor-dealer, kind of models, which is the traditional FMCG supply chain, if you like?
Again, in the market, it will depend on the market. There are markets that are very high density, for example, Bombay or Bangalore or Delhi. There, a direct-to-consumer supply chain will make sense because you can, and again, it comes down to how you design it. But if you design it for leveraging the density of the population there, you could probably build direct-to-consumer business, but it's really expensive. But in other markets, it will have to continue the traditional chains and networks of Indian distributors and dealers. So my sense is it won't make sense to just go out and apply one model to all our markets.
Right. So you see those models coexisting.
I think it's coexisted. The wholesaler has coexisted with the distributor for FMCG companies for years, and therefore similar things will happen. So we have to realize that everything you do in India has to be a bit hybrid. There is no pure play here because our market is not pure play.
Right. So I want to pick up the threads from something that you mentioned right at the beginning about the sheer amount of money, and that led to the money that was spent on Google, Facebook, YouTube.
Yeah.
And these platforms have become really the place where you acquire, retain and engage digital consumers. But to your mind, what are the specific lessons that you see in terms of how startups have to look at digital marketing and advertising or building customer acquisition engines?
I think startups have to realize that acquiring a consumer on digital is no less expensive. I think that's one fundamental way to look at it. It's not the people in Google and Facebook and YouTube. They're smart people. They know when there is a market how to maximize their returns. These are auction platforms. In fact, they maximize return on every transaction. Very different from a rate that you would get from traditional media. So I think it comes down to whether you decide to be not lazy and say that I need these platforms for kickoff. I need these platforms to take me to a certain level. But after that, if I'm not applying my ingenuity to think about what are the other platforms and what are the ways I can use my current base of customers, how do I create loyalty with my current base that I don't have to keep on spending again and again on them. So I think if you don't apply this mind, it's not going to work. The model which says that I spend on Google, Facebook, it costs 700-800 rupees to acquire a customer and you get 200 rupees for him. Now apply churn and you're spending 2000 rupees to get a customer who's buying stuff that leaves you margin with 400-500 rupees. Where is the LTV CAC playoff ever? So this is going to hurt, and I think people will realize that.
So who's doing things differently to your mind in this space, which would give us some clues of how this
again comes down to the model. For example, if you look at a company like Zomato, his customer acquisition cost is virtually zero because he's built user-generated content there. Again, if you look at e-commerce companies, the plain transaction between an Amazon and another player are the same. It's the same phone or same mixer or the same transistor or whatever you want to buy on both the platform. But the whole review that's available pre-transaction, the whole idea that this is the place I'll probably search and the trust cues you get there, that's the way you bring down your customer acquisition cost, because you're eventually you have to occupy a space in the consumer's mind, otherwise your startup doesn't exist. In fact, one of the ways to think about it is that I tell startups is that imagine you build a business the way you want with the money you want. Assume that it's an open checkbook to you. 5 years later, imagine that you cease to exist. Why will it pain somebody that you cease to exist? If you can't answer that question, then you really have a challenge, because unless you build something that people actually are engaged in, are hooked on to, and if you don't have the answer to that question, you shouldn't be building a startup. So by its non-existence, who gets impacted? And that will give you the answer as to what really were people looking for in a startup.
Okay.
So if you don't build those hooks, spending money it's not going to lead anywhere. It's like evaporating every day.
Right. Harish, just move to a slightly different kind of theme. There's a whole bunch of questions around the fact that digital disruption offers equal opportunities for both large established corporations as well as startups. Yet, there are whole questions that have come up around fintech specifically, and I'll kind of pick up a few.
Yeah.
Gautam Chugani from Singapore asks, do you see private banks with the darling of investors evolve in new tech and in this new tech and competitive landscape? Do you think that they can kind of make a play?
Yeah, so my sense is that fintech world over will be a challenging business, because I don't see central bankers leaving control of the money and economies into the hands of companies that they have no hold on. So my sense is you will find that the banking system will either transform itself, which looks more difficult, but they'll end up acquiring fintech players. So I think that's going to happen. Eventually, I see very little play for independent fintech companies to thrive beyond the point, because at some point they will have to come into a system where there's some control of a central banker, because otherwise you're just leaving the system to run riot. Right? And I'd be love to proven wrong, but I see that as a case. When you come back to India, I think several of the private banks are doing a fantastic job, but there is a fundamental difference. They still see the business as a banking business, whereas a fintech business see this as a transfer of bits and bytes between peoples. And therefore, the kind of UI and the layering that a fintech company brings to the table, I think that is like chalk and cheese between the private banks and these companies. So I see, I'm invested in a couple of fintech companies, and I see the difference between how they approach a problem versus how a banker has put together his thing. But eventually I see a combination of these. The large private banks have the balance sheets, have the money.
In fact, that's the question that Varun Balachandran from Chennai has kind of asked, where he wants to know how big a threat are fintech challenges really in terms of leveraging India Stack and Jam to kind of displace.
So I think that's the opportunity. So my sense is that if you look at what's happened with UPI and stuff like that, that layer is like, you imagine like an electrical socket. Now a startup has to go plug it himself in and build the new mixer or the new laptop or whatever a consumer needs. So I think that's a massive opportunity. But remember, that's not going into the core banking space. You will come into the space where you're actually creating a new customer experience. But I don't know how much of that will translate into you going straight into the space where you're actually able to take deposits from people and transfer and give them loans. I don't think that's going to happen without regulation.
Right.
So there is the periphery of the banking market where the NBFC plays today or where the MFIs play today. Those markets are actually ripe for either disruption or equally alliances for the
So you're saying that all the supernormal profits that they could have perhaps earned or easy money that they had will whittle away with this challenge?
Yeah, either they need to adopt the technology themselves and reduce their own operating costs, or a fintech guy, because remember, it's going to be ready today that all the work they've done over the years, wherein let's say you're a borrower in a small village. Now you borrowed from me 5 times over the last 5 years, and now your track record is available for the whole market. Plus I have Aadhaar, plus I have eKYC, plus I have your documentation available. For a new player to come in and lend to you, my costs are much lower because I'm not spending all that cost that got spent in acquiring you, in nurturing you.
Yeah.
So remember that's going to be more. It's going to put a pressure on the current financial players. That's going to happen.
Fair point. So Venki has, I think, 2 questions, and he asks, in the long term, since Digital India helps us leverage costs better, can our banks really challenge the world banking order? Is that too much of a tall ask?
No, I think banks over the last few years have been becoming more and more, they're pulling back into their markets because of the crisis of 2008. I think I don't see Indian banks becoming or wanting to actually go across the globe. I think there's huge depth to be done in Indian markets. Plus, sooner or later they'll realize technology is the only way to get a multiplier on their manpower, because as we go more cashless, as we go more, in fact, ATM less at some point, you'll find that their cost structures won't work, and if either they find a way to redeploy their entire teams and do things differently, or they'll face challenges.
And he has another interesting question, which is around UPI and Jam, and can Airtel really turn into a bank, and can ICICI become a telecom operator and get increased? Are those spaces going to blur?
I think they should have blurred by now. They haven't. Is a clear indication that it's a very difficult thing for a traditional company to switch mindset. And I was talking to somebody at one of the biggest retailers in India. You remember we spoke there,
Right.
And as I told that team, when you walk into an aisle, you see products and you see packages, and when a e-commerce guy wakes up and he looks at his warehouse, he sees bits of data everywhere. So I think it's a very difficult switch for traditional companies to embrace technology completely, and therefore it's important for them to realize that they need to play to their natural advantages versus try and become the next Flipkart or the next Amazon. And you saw Feature Group pulling back from e-commerce.
Right.
Clearly these are not battles for them.
Sure.
These battles will emerge over a period of time. Probably not right now is not the time for these battles.
Right. I have a question here from someone who calls himself me maniac, but
Okay.
and he wants to know, is it right to call Jio a 20 billion startup? What defines a startup? The idea was always a bunch of unknown guys disrupting.
No, so yeah. So what defines a startup is that if the startup founders and the team know that they are a provisional business, and in the sense that they are surviving, they're completely paranoid because their models have not settled down. They know that they still have to fight against all the forces that are out in the market, and really are a provisional business. So the moment, one of the things that has happened in India, some of these companies got funded so much that they got such a long runway that they suddenly thought, we have now arrived and we can survive. I think a startup mindset is defined from the fact that you're worried about your own survival all the time, and therefore you're fighting the order in the market.
Right.
You're fighting the order and the way business has been done by other people, or you're fighting to create a new path for a consumer to spend his money.
Right. So Krishnan Nair on Twitter asks, what advice do you give for Indian startups in a not so hot sector, recruitment in our case? And he says globally it's a very big market.
Yeah. Okay, so in the recruitment sector, frankly, you have a great player in the market, which is almost a monopoly in Naukri. Depends on which segment of the recruitment market you are. Are you a person selling a database, or are you a person actually giving recruitment services?
Right.
So these markets are huge markets abroad, because unfortunately, much like several other markets in India, there are many people deployed in this market. So if you are starting up a business tomorrow, you have hundreds of recruiters who are willing to come and serve you at your office.
Sure.
And therefore it becomes difficult for a technology-led solution to work.
Right.
And therefore, unless you do a combination of technology and servicing, which is what Naukri did when it started. It started as a foot soldier with over 1,000 people on the streets, actually printing resumes and showing it to customers. So I think some of these markets need this hybrid approach, versus just getting up and saying, okay, I've put up a website and I've put up an app and people will adopt. And that's not going to happen.
Right. I'll move to a question from Akash Porwal, and he asks, what's your dream for Digital India? What's currently missing that's still a dream to your mind from the ecosystem that is taking shape?
Okay, I would put it down to three things. I think one is broadband infrastructure. I think till that kicks in, we will not be able to drive the cost of data down, or data connectivity down, to nearly zero, and that's going to change things massively in the market if that happens. The second thing is vernacular. I think scores of Indians have been left out from all these billions of dollars we spent in talking and advertising in English. So I think the moment startups start talking to people in their own language, and probably even to people who don't understand the written word too much. I don't see a lot of visual interfaces come up. So I think a lot of things that are truly Indian are yet to come up. Some people are doing the work. There is companies building Android operating system in Hindi or in vernacular languages. There are people creating news, but still I think we're focused on the written word. I think there has to be much more of audio or visual signage or even video that has to be created for these markets. So my sense is that we are still serving customers or internet consumers. We need to go to the internet users, right, which I've talked about in my piece, and really make them customers for a few things.
Right. I'll move to another question that Walhadi from Bangalore had raised. I hope I got your Twitter handle right. He goes back to the point you were making on fintech and wants to know whether, do you think the current fintech startups are just lead generation engines for existing large financial services companies?
Some of them are, some of them are not. So I think some of them are doing a good work, but again, as I said, some of them are just becoming layers on the other players in the market, which are comparison engines and stuff like that. I think we are headed for a bit of evolution. A lot of startups have started and said, okay, we'll start funding SMEs and stuff like that. I think the challenge is not on giving loans. If I want to give you a loan, it's easy. The issue is how do I create the other side of my balance sheet where I have to raise money, and how will that be competitive, and why will that be competitive? So I think a lot of things will become clear over the next year or so, as you'll find this whole market, this wheat and the chaff separating really. Because some of them will be able to make it and come up with enough rigor in their processes that banks will be able to lend to them.
Right.
And they'll use that to make money.
Right.
But some of them which are lead generation engines are probably headed for a tough time.
Right, right. So Mr. Balchandar from, I think, from Gurgaon wants to know why talent in venture capital firms has remained more or less the same, no change since 2015, 16, and why is it deteriorated so much? I mean, he has a point of view obviously on that. Love to hear what you have to say.
No, I didn't get the question actually.
So I think he basically says that the talent in that's the first one
is the same. Okay. No, I guess see what you will find is that I know everybody's been blasting VCs for the last few months, but remember they had their own challenges of multiple of them trying to run around the same bunch of founders and invest quickly. But you'll find that in several VC firms, the early bets in certain spaces are going to deliver them good returns. I think this is a kind of strange pregnancy that we are in the middle of, where no exits are happening. But slowly, I think as these firms become leaner, some of them get cleaned up. You will have strategics from China and even the US probably buy them. So in the end, every VC survives on the fact that one of his or two of his 10 deals have to be a multi-bagger. I don't think the jury is still out whether that's going to happen or not, but chances are that will happen, and therefore you won't be able to turn around and tell them that they did bad deals for most of them, because they came in early enough. Remember that we are at the start of the journey of the Indian market, so even a few bets that were little blind bets would probably pay off.
Harish, I wanted to kind of focus on something that you wrote about in your essay, which is really around reframing the revenue or the cost challenge that startups face. And I'll kind of read out what you said. And I hear startups say that they have a revenue challenge. And let's accept that monetization and unit economics, the point that you made at the beginning, will remain challenging into the next decade. Now, it's for you to reframe it as a cost challenge and ask yourself, how can I deliver on this offering to the customer at the price he can afford? Now, how is there a method that startups could follow that would help them go along this path, the path that you're talking about, which is that start with thinking about, how do you do this frugally, how do you do this from a technology standpoint much more creatively? What is it, the 2 or 3 things that you could
see? I think fundamentally the big question is how much of technology leverage is there in your business. If you don't ask yourself that question, and you're really, let's say, look at a hyper local delivery service like a Grofers or whatever, you're going to deploy 4 people to go collect. One guy collects vegetables, another guy collects the macaroons, the third guy collects a glass of juice, and therefore the technology is only really redirecting those people. Therefore you start thinking as to how much technology leverage is there. And how much optimization is it delivering? If you don't ask yourself these questions, you may end up realizing that, and that's the first thing that will tell you whether a business model is viable at all or not. Once you have a sense of that, I think then it's very clear. I don't think it takes too long at the early angel funded or pre-series A stage. You can figure out the unit economics model that your startup can afford, that the whole market is willing to give you. I think then, once you get your funding, and you should go out and get the funding, you have to step back and say, how can I deliver this service at this cost? And therefore, it's very difficult to answer this without the context of a startup, but clearly that's where your ingenuity will count. And the people who can do that will probably now raise more money, because they'll be able to demonstrate better unit economics. We don't have to make profits, but we have to demonstrate a path to profitability. So, earlier it was very simple. You drew an Excel sheet and said, okay, I'll have 20 million customers, then I'll make money. I don't think that, we're past that phase now.
Right. Harish, Shohini Mittar, one of our former colleagues, she has a question on Facebook. How do VCs evaluate food delivery startups before investing in them? There hasn't been a single profitable or sustainable model yet. Is it the Achilles heel for the Indian startup?
Yeah, so my sense is food, I think it's a great space to be disrupting, because the Indian food habits are changing in a dramatic manner and will continue changing. So therefore, moving from unorganized to organized, all the shifts are there visible. But the challenge is that if you have a delivery boy who's going to work and deliver food only in the 2-hour window at lunchtime and a 3-hour window at dinner, you're really not able to squeeze out enough value of this whole proposition. So unless we are seeing internet only restaurants do a bit better because there is at least gross margin, but just in pure food delivery, it's a very thin margin business. Some players are currently doing a good job of that market because I think competition has come down and they've been able to get, let's say, a 15-20% margin from the restaurants. So my sense is that again it is overrated space. Everybody thought that spending will go up, but really most Indians don't want to spend more than 200 rupees for a lunch. Now, if you don't want to spend more than 200 rupees, how much margin is there in delivering a 200 rupee lunch? So those questions were not asked, and I think everybody is paying the price for that. And yes, I mean, a lot of us lost a lot of money.
Okay. There's a question all the way from London from S. Srinivasan. I mean, this is more a comment than a question, but he says a section of Indians may be looking at entrepreneurship only as a place to park themselves when they're retrenched from a regular job. They may also feed into their salary expectations both at the startup and the post-startup phase. Is that something that you sense?
Not really. I think no. We can take his comment at face value, but the fact is that all of that's changed.
Okay.
I think even startups, when they hire now, they'll be very careful about the salaries they'll pay. You're already seeing a lot of letting off of people going on in large firms. Right. It's unfortunate they're being let off for technically performance reasons, whereas frankly they're doing a LIFO in the sense last in first out kind of that's the kind of deal that's being given to the young people there.
Okay, there's a couple of more questions from Twitter and I'll jump into those. Why are there, and Me Maniac asks on Twitter, why are there so few hardware startups in India? How come it doesn't come to your mind? I mean, very few. How many come to your mind?
So my sense is that we've not been a hardware kind of country, in the sense we don't have the whole ecosystem that's needed. There are a few hardware startups there, but they're not nearly enough. One of the reasons is we don't have such a deep manufacturing base here. Everything, whatever a hardware startup makes, again will have to be manufactured in China. I guess it's a difficult one to answer. I don't think either the VCs or the whole founders ecosystem has actually worked hard to think about what new hardware ideas we can come up with. We are still a derivative market in that sense.
Right. So Amod asks on Twitter, in US, tech saves labor costs, creates capturable value like Instacart. In India, labor is surplus. So what creates elusive value?
That's the big question. I think his question is completely correct, that if your labor is available at a price where if your technology is not delivering a substantial advantage over the entire value chain, not just touching labor as a cost, you will find the economic stuff. So it's just not enough to imagine when you're talking about hyper-local delivery. You can frankly put a telephone operator, and that's what your app or your tracking system is doing, a telephone operator's job. Is it fundamentally changing anything in the value chain? If it is not, how will you derive value? See, eventually all these startups will be valued on the value they add, and that's the one reality we have to all subscribe to and understand, that over a longer period of time, forget about Series A, Series B, Series C. Eventually, if your startup is not adding value, is not generating a sufficient value in that chain between the consumer and the product or the service he picks up, you don't deserve to have the value. So all of these things will happen, and therefore you're seeing valuations move up and down in this dramatic fashion, from 5 billion to 15 billion and back to 5. And that's what's happening.
Right. There's a question that's come in more from CV Subhash, who's a mentor coach. And he's saying, do you have any thoughts specifically on leadership development? Because I guess you've seen talent come in which weren't prepared to, for the kind of frugal.
Yeah, I have seen it firsthand in housing.com.
Okay.
So, and several others as well. I think, as I said, I think some of the, again, depending on the context, but some of the founders in India need the professional help, and I think you will need grey hair or somewhat more experienced professionals in a startup as part of a founding team. So yes, you will have the odd few, let's say, super smart, super mature kids, but I wouldn't bet on that being the case in every business.
Right, right. So there's another question that's come in from someone who has a Twitter handle called Almost Detached.
Okay.
And he asks, apart from venture debt, how and when will startups be able to access debt capital?
Not for a long time.
Why
I don't think our systems are designed yet to give unsecured debt. A bit of that is coming up as he's talking about venture debt. You can avail a bit of money by discounting your invoices, but all of that is happening already. But at a fundamental level, since you have no assets and no ability to securitize the debt, I think we are a long way away from. So working capital financing will happen, in the sense that's money in the works which somebody may come in and offer you.
Right.
But unlikely that you will get venture debt unless you're a really large business, a regular debt, I mean.
Right. So I think we've kind of covered a fair bit of ground, Harish.
Yeah.
Thank you for doing this. I'm sure we'll carry the conversations forward. This is not something that we'll kind of, it's a one-shot attempt. So if you have more questions, feel free to kind of tweet us on Ask Harish, and we'll see if he can respond to it, or leave your comments on our Founding Fuel page as well. I hope this has been a useful, interesting session for you. The video of this session will also be available on our Facebook page, on YouTube, and on Twitter as well, because we've used Periscope. So keep watching. We'll be back with more exciting stuff, and I think it's a glass which is clearly half full. There's a lot more opportunity out there which Harish has spoken about today, which you've got to, I think about and leverage and make something out of it. So thank you so much. Thanks for watching. Good afternoon. Thanks, Harish.